As I mentioned before, it's our great pleasure to welcome once again to the Kennedy Center Dodge Billingsley. Dodge is a film producer and director of combat films and research. His company filmed this project for the British Broadcasting Company and the Learning Channel. CFNR released Virgin Soldiers in 2003, a documentary following the advance of a Marine squad from Kuwait to Baghdad during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Those of you who've heard Dodge speak before may have seen some of that documentary footage and heard his personal experiences in making that film. He's also done extensive work in Afghanistan since 2001, as well as in other parts of the Middle East, China, Africa, and Asia. Billingsley received a bachelor's degree in history from Columbia University and a master's degree in war studies from London's King's College. He is always someone who's got a fire in the iron and very interesting projects ongoing, and I'm sure that today will be no exception. Please join me in welcoming Dodge Billingsley.
One technical thing to do. Okay. Oh, I've already done it. I've never used PowerPoint before today. That's kind of embarrassing to admit, but we thought it was a good way to I thought it would be a very nice way to explain my most recent trip to Iraq and to at least highlight a lot of different things that I want to bring up, which could go either way, in more of the discussion period. There will be plenty of time to ask and answer questions, and feel free to interrupt me along the way as well. I went over there this last March. I guess I've been home for about a month, and about a month and a week, and my job was to stick with a soldier in a unit up in Mosul, and actually it was up to me which soldier I was with and which city and area I was with, which unit. So I chose Mosul for a number of reasons. And one is because it's the only place where the Stryker Brigade Combat Team is deployed in Iraq, and we're going to go into what that is. I wanted to look at that new piece of military equipment and see how it operated, because I'd been with Bradleys and other types of units, mechanized units before, so I really wanted to see this. I also wanted to take a look at the situation up there in the north, because I spent a lot of my time in southern Iraq and all the way to Baghdad. And the other factor generating where I went was based on the concept of the film was A Day at War. And the idea was I was going to film my person for 2 or 3 weeks, but on the 22nd of March, that was the day that I was going to film nonstop. Whatever he did, I filmed. And there were 16 other camera crews around the world. There was somebody with Maoist rebels in Nepal. There was somebody with FARC in Colombia. There were some of the special forces in Colombia. So these 16 camera crews were going to take the footage from all the footage from March 22nd and put it into one 90-minute film. It'll be and so again, March 22nd was a very big day for us. Unfortunately, as you remember, in March we were going through the transition period where a lot of U.S. forces were being rotated out and a number of U.S. forces were being rotated in. So it was my primary consideration was I didn't want to get stuck watching a soldier unpack boxes or weapons or pack boxes or weapons. So I had to be with a unit that was in place. The 3rd Stryker Brigade Combat Team took over for the 101st in Mosul on February 5th. So they weren't going anywhere, so it was a good bet. So that's where we went. I put together some slides here. I want to show you. This is the city of Mosul. You can see there's a river, the Tigris River, that runs through it. There's 5 key bridges that separate the city. They're considered strategic, and the U.S. forces there are aware of these 5 bridges because they have bases, forward operating bases, FOBs they call them, throughout the city in different places. This is just a tourist map, or what was left of a tourist map. But there's some interesting sites like the Nineveh ruins up here. It's a very historical city. Let's see, what can I show you? I think I may have got this mixed up, but the Arab-Kurdish sectors was not as clear as that, but there was an Arab and a Kurdish side. This is they call it Saddam's mosque. It's not exactly, I think there's an official name for it, but it was built to honor Saddam, but construction was stopped, of course, when the war occurred. But you can see it's pretty massive complex. It just sort of sits there now. This is looking out onto the Nineveh ruins. And this is from Firebase, Maine. You can see Firebase, Maine is actually an Iraqi military facility, and I'll explain that a little bit later. The other thing I kind of want to highlight is all these cars. Locals that I talked to estimate that there's 150,000 new vehicles on the road in Mosul. It's a city of about 2 million, 1.7 to 2 million people, and there's 150,000 new vehicles on the road since the collapse of Saddam's regime and this freedom and the chance to buy a car and to drive around and stuff, which has led to massive traffic jams all over Mosul. But there's a strategic and tactical, there's a tactical factor in this, which I want to bring up later, so I just want to keep that in mind. At first, I think I want to just talk a little bit about the insurgents, their tactics and strategy, and their weapons and statistics. And I'm going to go to a slide here. This vehicle right here was a British SAS, British Special Forces vehicle. There were 2 British Special Forces operators in this vehicle. 3 Iraqi vehicles penned them in, riddled it with, who knows, 1,000 rounds, killed the 2 operators. It's never reported, as is customary with the British Special Forces. It's not reported. This incident was not reported. It's a British thing. That's why it's not reported. But this was very much what was going on in Mosul while I was there. You had a number of, you hear about these IEDs, improvised explosive devices. They go off all the time. I need to probably back up and say that while I was there, we were rocketed or mortared every single day. But it was very random. It was usually 1 or 2 shots, and if they didn't get you, then they were off and running. Or, in most cases, they were remote detonated devices. What I found interesting, I'll talk about U.S. tactics and strategy in a bit, was that the other thing they've gone to doing is using vehicles to pin these thin-skin. There's no armor on this SUV. You can see the armor on the Stryker. In fact, this picture says a lot. Here's the Stryker vehicle right here. It's a wheeled armored personnel carrier. Its only combat deployment, well, this is its first combat deployment. There's only 1 brigade combat team even in existence. The 2nd brigade is supposed to follow them through. They don't even have their vehicles yet. That's how new this weapons system is, this platform is. As a result of all military procurement programs, because they're so politically fueled in this country, there was a lot of people who said the Stryker is going to fail miserably in Iraq, and a lot of people saying it's going to just save the day. I don't know if it's done either one, but I will say that they've done a few things. This steel cage is an adaptation from what the Israeli Defense Forces use in the Gaza Strip and West Bank. And they found that by putting the steel cage on it, bringing it out about 1.5 feet from the actual armored side of the vehicle, it deflects rockets and mortars, and it's not foolproof, but the chance of getting it through the slat is very rare, and it deflects it just enough that the blast occurs 1.5 feet out. You're going to get some blast damage here, but none of the Stryker vehicles have ever been penetrated yet. So, like I say, it's an interesting adaptation. It's also a wheeled vehicle, which makes it very quiet and very fast compared to a Bradley or an M1 tank. And they call it, the local Iraqis call them ghost vehicles, because you can literally go 70, 75 miles an hour and pull right up onto your target area, and they don't know you're there until you turn the corner, because they blend in with traffic. They're not as loud as a semi-truck. They're not as quiet as a car, but they're a lot quieter than an armored tracked vehicle. I mean, I was in the invasion up to Baghdad. You could hear us coming for miles, I have no doubt, because every time we stopped and turned off our engine, another column was inevitably 2 miles over on our flanks, and you could hear them. You tracked vehicle on asphalt, very loud. And in a strange way, I think these vehicles are pretty good because they kind of help us with the Hearts and Minds campaign in a very subtle way. Tracked vehicles tear up the asphalt really bad, so if you move a bunch of infantry units in and tracked vehicles into the city, you're going to tear all the major roads up in a matter of months. It's just a tire, so they don't tear anything up. They drive with traffic, which is another thing, which makes them actually more susceptible to taking fire. The way they got this vehicle, like I said, they pinned in 3 Iraqi vehicles, pinned them in. That's been something that the insurgents have used. They've used BMWs, high-performance cars, faster cars, and they've used, on the low end of the spectrum, really bad rickety taxis, because there's, 50,000, I don't know how many taxis there are, but there's thousands of taxis around the city, and one of them will hold 4 guys with Kalashnikovs, and they'll just come right up beside your vehicle and just spray it until everybody's dead and the vehicle burns. While I was there, we went to a site there was, I think, I can't remember now if it was 4 or 2 Christian missionaries working on a water project that were killed the same way. The guys in Fallujah that were killed and hung off the bridge, killed the same way. They just drove up, penned them in, and it's a soft-skin vehicle, they can't get out of it. These do take a lot of hits from remote detonated devices along the roadside. The day I left, actually, a 155 millimeter mortar shell, probably about 6 feet off, was exploded, remote detonated. They missed the front of the vehicle, they hit the side. It totally sheared up all this this armor here. The guy in the air guard hatch, who's usually standing here, he was knocked unconscious for about 5 minutes. The driver was knocked unconscious, and so was the track commander. So the vehicle was swerving out of control at about 50 miles an hour because the driver was completely knocked unconscious. He regained in about 2 minutes. They say, it's amazing it didn't flip over, and they got everybody out. They took this guy to the hospital, but again, they released him like an hour later out of the field hospital. That's about the most damage these things have had. They've had a good run so far. However, I will say that the insurgent tactics will adapt. That's just the nature of warfare. We adapt, they adapt, we adapt, they adapt. Every military technology is offset by a new tactic or a superior military technology. And that's kind of the history of arms and warfare. Let's see. This is an interesting device we found. It's a homemade multiple launch, rocket launch system, MLRS. You see the tubes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tubes, 10 tubes that can fire 10 rockets at a time or 10 mortars or whatever they're throwing in there. Here's all the wires. It was designed to be remotely detonated again so the insurgent could set this up on a rooftop, which is what they did, load the tubes, string the wire around the corner, around the block, and punch go. And it would point. It was like an area saturation weapon. I mean, it's not going to be accurate at all, which is why I say when we were attacked every single day, the closest round to me came, I think, about 70 meters. And it was enough to throw shrapnel everywhere. We were eating dinner, of all things, at the chow hall. And we all hit the floor because it shook everything off the shelves and stuff. But there were no casualties. But these weapons, again, they're not incredibly accurate, but they can put fire onto your base. But that's it's just kind of one of the many things that they're using out there, and they keep improvising. One thing I think they've done that's been really interesting is in their mortar tubes, they're using half charges on their mortars, and they're shooting at a lower trajectory. Why? Because a half charge, when you drop a mortar down the tube, you can hear it. In Afghanistan, we were dropping mortars in the tube. We could hear it, and so could the anti-U.S. forces. They could hear it. And what they would do is they would listen. When they heard it, they knew they were smart. They knew they had 30 seconds for that mortar round to travel, and then they would run in their cave, and then the mortar round would hit outside the cave. They'd wait for the dust to settle, and they'd come right back out and start firing again. What they've done by cutting their charge in half is they've made it a quiet launch. It doesn't have to go as far, but they don't have to go as far because you're in an urban environment. I mean, basically, they're shooting from one rooftop, and you're only 200 meters away, so they can shoot a low charge. You don't hear it being hit. You don't hear it hit the tube. You hear it when it comes in on your compound and explodes. The other thing they do is they fire a very low trajectory, which negates or can go below what we call our counter battery radar. And basically, we have the U.S. has a technology where they can tell when a mortar where it's fired from, and before the mortar even hits the ground, they're firing back. It's automated system. They pick the point of fire, origination of fire, and then they're firing back. If they fire below the radar, below the radar screen, you can't tell where it's coming from. So again, you're kind of left to guessing, and so you can't respond to their fire. This is a kind of a measure of statistics for basically when I was there and a little bit before. When they first arrived, 9th to the 15th, their first full week of duty on the Stryker brigade, that's how many incidents they had against them. And then it started tapering off, and while I was there was a lull. It got really slow, and I was like, got kind of actually boring. And then I left about in the middle of this week, and it just peaked, and it peaked primarily on the 28th. So they had like 10 to 12 incidents. And then, as you know, it got really bad all over Iraq in April, but primarily in Fallujah, Najaf, and Sadr City in East Baghdad. What I think is interesting, and is that most of these incidents, again, aren't, except for pinning vehicles in, soft-skinned vehicles, where they actually confront you because they know they have the numbers and speed and surprise on their side. There's not open battles like Fallujah. Fallujah and Najaf, Sadr City, those, I think, they're going to be spikes in military activity. I don't think they're going to be the norm. What we see in Fallujah is what we thought we would see in Baghdad last year, open street fighting in an urban environment where U.S. troops are pitted against dismounted infantry troops, are just pitted against insurgents, basically armed the same, because in an urban environment you can't bring your heavy weapons to bear unless you're willing to just eliminate every civilian in the path. It's very hard to bring in a fighter and strike on a city block, or artillery a city block, or a helicopter gunship or an AC-130, what we primarily use to support ground combat troops in the city, unless you're willing to just say, I'm going to kill 10,000 civilians today to save a platoon of Marines. And so it's knowing that, that's what we all anticipated we'd see in Baghdad, that we thought the Iraqis are smart. They will know that they can suck us into the cities and fight. They didn't do it, but they started in April. I think was the really first time they did it in any sustained, multiple-day type of engagement, which is really interesting. I'm sort of waiting to see how that works out. As far as on the coalition side, you have three tiers of the Iraqi forces: the Iraqi Police, the Iraqi Civil Defense Corps, and the Iraqi Armed Forces, or they were the new Iraqi Army, so you may hear them referred to as the NIA. Now the police, they get hit every week, and they lose someone about once a day. And in fact, there's been, I think to date now, about 500 Iraqi police killed. We've got about 800 U.S. soldiers killed, about 500 Iraqi police. If you go to an Iraqi police checkpoint, you know exactly why they got killed. Their weapons will be kind of dangling at their side. And you go, and I'll show you some video. We go to a police station, and all of our guys are like this. I mean, our guys. All the U.S. soldiers are like this. They're ready, or they try to be ready. Iraqi police, one guy is bouncing the barrel off the toe of his shoe the whole time, like this, just looking around, and he had no body armor on, and they don't have hardened checkpoints or soft checkpoints. So a rocket strike against an Iraqi police station, just goes right through the wall and kills whoever's inside. They have suffered. They're not incredibly effective, but they are doing a lot of domestic, taking care of a lot of domestic duties. In fact, you'll see traffic signals. I mean, just basic general police activity that you see here, you see there, which is a dramatic improvement from this year or this time last year. In fact, what's interesting about the Stryker vehicles is they're told now they have to roll with traffic. When they first got there, they were told, you own the road, you do whatever you want. They really tried to be a little softer footprint within the city. So we have to stop. They have to stop at stop signs. They have to stop at traffic circles. They don't like it because it makes them vulnerable, sitting target. But you can't just run. They ran over so many cars in Mosul when they first got there, they said, because they put the new cage on, and no one had ever driven it with the cage, which made them 3 feet wider. And they just ripped the sides off little microbuses, and they would just have a stack of forms, which basically said, here's your claim form against the U.S. government. And they'd run over a car, shoot, sign it, and pass it out. And it was like they had to adapt their strategy and tactics and become better drivers, frankly, with this cage, because all of a sudden their vehicle got 3 feet wider. The Iraqi Civil Defense Corps. This is one of the Iraqi police stations, kind of over here. These two. It's a really bad photo, I know, but it's weird. You get sent, and like I say, if you stay with it, you can't be everywhere at once. It's kind of interesting. Reporting war is very difficult because war is very localized. These two, you can't really see it probably, but these two vehicles here were blown up and burned. They're Iraqi police vehicles. They kind of pulled out. They were going to do their thing. Boom, they got hit. So then the Strykers here. They cordon off the perimeter here, and they're down this side of the road, cordon off, checking to see. I think 4 Iraqi policemen died at this raid or this attack, and they're just there to help out. But again, it's not an armored vehicle; they're just soft vehicles, and so they take a heavy toll. These are the Iraqi Civil Defense Corps. They also are not completely, incredibly well armed. There's their truck. Medium to light machine gun mounts here. Radio mounts. They patrol the city. They're starting to take more active patrol, and they're kind of more like an internal security force, almost like a Russian or Soviet Oman type force. We don't really have this equivalent here in the U.S.
Why do you suppose that the Iraqis are taking it out on their own police?
That's a really good question. I personally think that although, I'm going to write that question. Well, do you just ask me that at the end? Because we're going to talk about more general stuff like that. Give you the detail here, and that's something we definitely need to talk about. There's another picture of them getting ready to go out on their patrol. They're not, I could jump out of an alley and spray one of those vehicles and probably kill someone just by luck. So it's not, these are different than the armored patrols. But they are taking trying to take more of an active role, but again, they don't have, they don't have body armor, as you can see. And those who do, most time they don't wear it. It's a different military culture. It's just a different culture. They get paid, a sergeant in the ICDC gets paid $75 a month, and he works from 7 to 3. It's just like an 8-hour job, 8 hours a day job. That's what I was told. I mean, the sergeant that I spoke to. Iraqi armed forces are a little bit different animal. That's the new Iraqi army. Mosul was the site of the first recruiting station, satellite recruiting station outside of Baghdad. And when I left in March, they had 3 full battalions trained and activated. Their goal is to have 1 full division in North Iraq by summer. And I asked what summer meant. Did that mean by the CPA handover? Did it mean by the end of the summer? Did it mean by the beginning of summer? No one could seem to know. But they're going to really have to move fast because there's no way they're going to get an entire division. They have, and I didn't bring this on a map, the 3rd Battalion basically is in Mosul, and it occupies this place called the Talafar Castle outside of the city. In that area, at Al-Kisik, there's also a base, an old Soviet, old Iraqi division-sized base. That will be the home of the new Iraqi army, or the Iraqi armed forces for Mosul. And again, they hope to have the entire division there by summer. But in March, the end of March, they had 3 battalions, figure 3 to 4 battalions per brigade, 3 brigades per division. You can do the math. They got a lot of troops to recruit and train and get up there and to be effective. I don't know what that means, if they'll do it or not. But that's kind of the current status. You have 1 battalion of armed forces, and they're based right with the U.S. forces, too. There's units right alongside. Like our base was called Fire Base Merez, named after one of the Apache pilots who was shot down and killed early, about 8 months ago. And we had a contingent. There was a contingent of IAF on the base, and they had their own compound within. They flew the Iraqi flag, and they would go on joint missions and things like that. Like I said, the future projections, they're supposed to have a division by the summer in the north. It's hard. My friend is head of recruiting in Mosul. He works for SAIC, and he said the biggest problem they've had in recruiting is they have to do a quick and dirty background check, which basically they're up against this timeline to get these troops on the ground, and yet they get all these guys that want to join. They don't know if they're insurgents. They don't know if they're just guys hiding out to gather information. They don't know any of these things, so they do a quick and dirty background check, and then they're trying to split the battalions up ethnically. Because the problem you have in a lot of parts of the world, which you also have in Iraq, is you have a Kurdish north, a Sunni middle, and a Shia majority down in the south. In the United States, we build our army not along race or gender, right? You don't have African-American divisions or Hispanic divisions or white divisions or whatever. But in these parts of the world, it's very, very common to have along tribal lines or family lines or on ethnic lines. If you have all Kurds, there's no way the Arab sector of Mosul historically, these people, they know they will not be well represented by the army, and they'll probably be subject to punitive raids and just problems after the U.S. or Western forces leave. Likewise, if you have all Sunnis patrolling the Kurds, that's not going to work either. The Kurds aren't going to stand for it. So you're leading to you're just sort of building in future conflict. So what they're trying to do is integrate an ethnic mix into the battalions, which goes against a long history in that part of the world. And it's going to be really interesting to see if they can make this happen, make this work. It's one thing in training to have a Sunni, a Shia, a Kurd, all training next to each other. But then at some point, they're going to be deployed together. They're all going to have weapons fully loaded. Someone's going to become the NCO, the sergeant over the squad. Will the Kurds listen to a Sunni squad leader? It's going to be really interesting. But at least they're trying to do it, because it really is the future. I mean, if you think about it, I hate to use the word more modernized nations, but those nations who have gotten past ethnic division, military based on ethnic lines, usually they have less internal strife because it's not a Hispanic, it's not a white, it's not a black, it's not an Asian American, it's the army. And there's some, you get some sort of, leveling out, so to speak, and it's going to be a struggle there. U.S. operations, okay, order of battle, tactics and strategy, and then what I call reactive and offensive. The order of battle in Mosul is Task Force 121, which is Delta Force. They don't say Delta Force, and it's a word you're never supposed to speak. because they don't really exist, right? But they're really they're good. Then you have Navy Special Warfare. In Mosul right now, you have Navy SEAL Team 7, which is being replaced by Navy SEAL Team 2. And that's actually happening this month. So probably SEAL Team 2 is there. You have the 10th Special Forces Group, elements. I mean, these are all elements, not every Delta guy, not every, but these are just elements of these. And then you have the 3rd Stryker Brigade Combat Team. That's the U.S. Order of Battle in Mosul. Yeah.
How come these don't exist?
Oh, it's just kind of, they didn't exist until Black Hawk Down was written. They were just considered the top secret echelon of U.S. Special Forces. And until it was kind of openly, until the Bowden, I guess is his name, who wrote Black Hawk Down, he was able to gather Delta interviews that became like publicly acknowledged that Delta Force existed. I mean, everybody knew they existed, but you were never supposed to like say it. It's like the National Reconnaissance Office. For years we ran that in the Cold War, but yet it didn't exist until '89. So, I mean, it was just top secret. But in Mogadishu, they lost a number of Delta operators, and so and other Deltas spoke about it. What's interesting in the U.S. Order of Battle and the Special Forces Command structure is that they're operating mixed teams. I talked about this last year. It's not uncommon to see some Task Force 121 guys, a couple SEALs, a couple guys from the Green Berets, either 10th, 5th, 3rd, one of those groups, and then a handful of Rangers who are kind of in between combat infantry and special forces. They're definitely better trained than combat infantry, but they're not considered special forces. Made into A and B teams where they'll travel around and do it. I went on 2 raids while I was there with the SEAL Team 7, and I'm going to talk about these raids in a second. I didn't do anything with Task Force 121. I mean, I'm just not even allowed to talk to them, So, but it's interesting. The combat infantry, whenever Task Force 121 comes into their compound, they go, "Oh, here's the varsity team," and they're all excited. And the SEALs come in and they go, "Yeah, they're all right." And then the 10th group comes in and they go, "Oh, the JV, they're terrible. We hate working with them." And what I found was really interesting was, I'm not kidding, when the SEAL team laid down their maps, and I saw some of the Task Force 121's aerial reconnaissance photos, you could see the type of doorknob on the door. And that's how detailed it was. And they were basically saying, okay, we can tell by this door that's probably got a deadbolt on the backside, so we're going to blow it with a type blah, blah, blah charge. I mean, it was big. It was like, wow. They can control the aerial platform out, above them to do their own recon. SEALs kind of did the same thing. When 10th group rolled up, they had like a piece of paper like I have, and they go, okay, here's the house, and they draw it out for you, It was a really big difference, and I'm not ripping on the Green Berets at all. They're, definitely doing a lot of work out there. But I think this order of battle is important, and then here's your infantry unit. By number, this is by far the largest unit. SEAL Team 7, the whole team deployed, I don't even know, 35, 40 guys maybe. Every time I went on, they split their team into 3 Humvees each. We did multiple, so 4, 12. On the raids themselves, we only went out with no more than 24 guys. But they were always with a company, or at least a platoon size of this group. 10th group traveled the same way. I think it's important because what I witnessed in Mosul is I think what's going on in most parts of Iraq is this, goes under a tactics and strategy category. There's a very reactive approach and an offensive approach to this war fighting in Iraq. The reactive approach, as I mentioned earlier, we patrol 24/7. In the Strykers, all the time we patrol. I don't think I slept more than 3 hours in any block ever. And that's just the way it is, and I respect those guys. And at some point, I got to graduate from what I do because I'm the age of all the lieutenant colonels. They don't patrol 24/7. The guys that are 20 patrol 24/7, and I just get really tired. But it's very reactive. They go on patrol. It's called a presence patrol. One, you're putting your presence out there. So yes, it's probably good to show that the Americans are there. But the other aspect is they're there to take fire. If you get fired on, you have a chance to then respond and maybe take out an enemy. If you don't get fired on, you never, every patrol I went on, we only got fired on one time directly. It's up in the Nineveh ruins. It's 2 in the morning, and we were all really tired. And everyone's laying down on their back in the grass. The grass is about knee high. And all of a sudden, rounds will start going over your head about 2 feet, just like right there. And you're like, whoa, someone's firing us with like a light machine gun. And everybody kind of rolls over on their stomach, and then they start returning fire through the grass. But, they were firing at us from 300 yards in the middle of the night. I'm sure we didn't hit anything. They didn't hit anything, and that was basically it. When I listen to new talks about we need more troops for Iraq, yes, we do, in the sense that we need troops to secure supply lines and this and that and the other. But what's interesting is this reactive component, which is primarily the combat infantry component. They're not really taking out those people opposed to what the U.S. is doing there. They're just not doing it. Like I say, Fallujah, Najaf, Sadr City, I think they're anomalies. I think that you'll see it spike once in a while, but it's not going to be the norm. You haven't seen open street fighting break out in every major city in Iraq for sustained periods of time, and I don't think you will. But you'll see it coming from time and time again. To give you an idea of the little patrol, here we are. Every morning we get the brief from the lieutenant. Here's our platoon, 4 strikers. He's given the update where we're going to go, et cetera, et cetera. This is what we're like every day, driving around all crammed into the vehicle. You see in the rear there's 2 hatches, so the guys are standing on the back. There's a 50 caliber or a Mark 19 gun on the front, and then there's 2 guys in the back, rear air guard. You can see the traffic over here in the corner. You just have to drive through traffic. I mean, it's very much, try to be as user-friendly as possible, because they assume that 99 or 95% of the people in Mosul are totally fine with having the U.S. troops there. And that, that may be true, because and there's no way to know, but I know from my experience in Chechnya that they estimated, and my living with Chechen rebels for 2 months, never were there more than probably 3,000 to 5,000 Chechen rebels ever at any one particular time fighting the Russians. And yet, look what they've been able to do. If you have a city of 1.7 million and 1% is bent on destroying your effort there, and they're willing to take up arms, it only takes a tiny group of extreme activity, or a tiny group of people conducting extreme activity, to actually make a difference, to send off the rockets, to fire the mortars. And so the other 95% of the population, you really just kind of have to try to live with them and not disrupt their life so much. And it's hard, because the military is trained to break stuff and kill stuff. And they admit that. They all hate peacekeeping. I talked to so many of the soldiers about morale, and they all said the same thing. Well, morale's okay, except I hate peacekeeping. I hate police action. I would rather fight. And that's not, I made this point before, but I really do believe that if you get to combat infantry, yes, you may have gone to the Army or the Marines to get the GI Bill, but by the time you're in a combat zone and you're combat infantry, you get bored just riding around for 7-8 months. You'd rather fire that weapon you've trained on, the whole time, and everybody cannot be found. Well, I had a little short film to show you, but I'm not sure why. Anyway, let's see. Okay, I think this is just 3 minutes. It's nothing really dramatic. This is a little bit of patrol. Oh, it didn't show it. I don't know why it didn't show it. It just showed us on patrol going out to the police station. I'll try to see when we do questions if we can load it back there. But this is one of the examples of the activity there, and it's a plea by coalition forces to get people to turn in weapons. You can see. They're asking for everything. They're asking for everything. But what it really implies is that everything's out there. There's machine guns and crew-served weapons and RPGs and mortar and artillery rounds. And while we were there, Navy SEAL Team 7 took an SA-16. And that led to the raid we did the next night to grab the guy. They had tracked this SA-16, changed hands 6 times, they said. 6 times in like a 40-hour, 36-hour, 48-hour period. They nailed it down, and with the SA-16, there were a number of suicide vests and other things they also picked up. Nailed it down to an individual, and went on this raid. And here's an example of one of the pre-planning things for the raid. There's a house that they're going to attack here, and you roll up in the middle of the night. You roll up here to this traffic circle, shows your outward blocking positions, to make sure nobody comes in and increases your you come in. We secured this area all right here. Navy SEALs rolled in. We busted down the door, came in, did a brief recon of the house. SEAL team then come in. They do a more in-depth interrogation. It's not, it's hard. It's hard for me. we went in and took a guy, and he had 3 kids and a wife, at 2 in the morning. And, a guy turned out to be, well, he had an SA-16 and a bunch of suicide vests. Was there any doubt the guy was bad on the surface? No. But, you still have to go in there, and you got to cordon off the family, and you got to deal with little kids, and it's hard. I don't like it, but it's messy. And that's kind of how guerrilla campaigns are, and that's what we're seeing in Iraq right now. It's a guerrilla campaign. The same guy that's probably waving at you during the day and selling you a kebab is, marking your vehicle and figuring out when he's going to, it's hard to know. It's really tricky. Yeah.
Maybe this is a dumb question, but can you elaborate a little bit more on what is an SA-16?
Oh, it's a surface-to-air missile. And they've really tried to go over tried to grab these SA-7s, these different series surface-air missiles, because that's what they can shoot down the helicopters with. Or like when you fly into Mosul Airport or any combat zone, it's like a roller coaster. You wouldn't think a C-130 can do these kind of maneuvers, but they never just kind of come in, because they don't control the perimeters around these air bases. So what you do is you corkscrew, and then you just go like this, boom, and you land. And it's a ride, because they're taking this huge transport plane, and they're trying to land you in this funnel, because that's supposedly out of missile range, because they'll control only that narrow perimeter. And so when you land in Mosul or Bagram was the worst, because there's mountains surrounding it. This is Afghanistan. And I couldn't believe the just descent on that thing as fast as we hit the ground, in fact, while I was there, when I was leaving, I was supposed to catch a flight out. It's called Chrome 21 was the flight number. And I was excited. 3 weeks, I was kind of tired and dirty, and I was just like, okay, I can't wait to get out and start looking over things. And in comes the plane. It overshoots the runway, but decides he's going to put it down anyway. So he puts it down at the end of the runway. Boom, both tires blow, the transmission breaks. The plane just comes skidding to just on the metal. There's 45 U.S. soldiers who are trying to get at, I think they probably thought, we're wrecked and we're dead, of course, and the plane kind of ground to a halt. They come spilling out, and they're like, it's like an evasive action to get out in case the plane blows up, from a gas leak or something. And there's me, and there was 2 guys from Task Force 121 and a couple of Blackwater, some of the private security groups, and we all looked at each other and we go, well, crap, there's our plane for the day. It's like, that's it. So we had to go back, and I slept with the airfield for 2 days waiting for the next plane. But I mean, it's just a little humor. So, anyway, yeah.
Just out of curiosity, I know the SA-7 is a shoulder launched, but are the others that you mentioned?
The SA-16 is also shoulder launched.
Shoulder
Yeah.
launched, like a Stinger?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's very, like I say, the thing I think that impressed me most was the type of operation that we're doing. We have these really, like I call them reactive, and I don't mean to belittle these operations. You have to do them. You have to guard supply lines. You have to have infantry guard your fuel line. But they're not doing anything. They're not taking out the bad guy. All operations against insurgents are intelligence-driven out of the intelligence departments. And it's not to say that the infantry didn't generate their own intelligence. It's just that the Special Forces intel assets were better, and they could focus on it. And that's why when I was there, the only raids being conducted were driven by the Special Forces community, whether 121, SEAL Team 7, or 10th Group. And they always enlisted the help of the combat infantry, but really combat infantry was there waiting for them to come up with the intel to tell you where to strike. And so it's going to be, I think, a very slow, painstaking process to eliminate cells they really don't even understand the nature of. The other thing about this, and I should have made a diagram, the cell structure is interesting because what they found is you'll have the head of the cell, and then they'll have a logistics person here, someone who's going to do whatever, or maybe someone here is going to grab the, the weapon, and then someone here who's going to maybe do propaganda, and someone here who's going to grab funding from the United Arab Emirates or wherever to fund building these things. And they'll have this whole network around him, but between each one, he uses intermediaries, sometimes 1, 2, and 3. The guy who's the weapon supplier has never met the head of the cell. They don't even know him. He works with 1 or 2 or 3 intermediaries, so if he gets nabbed, he can't turn the guy in. This is what they believe from interrogating the prisoners they have taken, is they cannot turn the head guy in. Sometimes they get lucky and turn the head guy in. He may not even know this guy. They for sure usually have never met. We saw this in Afghanistan too, and it's historic. It's prevalent in history as well. The U.S. is a large conventional military. The U.S. has a large conventional military machine. In Operation Anaconda, we spoke about that a couple years ago. What they found afterwards was once they conducted Operation Anaconda, After that, the Taliban never got together again. They decided it wasn't worth it to group, because if you group, the U.S. can come in and kill you in large numbers, because we can put a large amount of fire in a really quick period. So now you have these little cells, a couple here, a couple there. Do you send a whole battalion out to get a couple guys? Well, you do, but I mean, that's a lot of collecting. In other words, it's a lot of work now. You can't just say, and again, it goes with the whole morale issue of soldiers wanting to actually fight rather than just drive around and police all day, because they're never going to find a company to face their company. It's just not going to be that kind of war. So there's going to be a little bit of frustration, I think. But at the same time, it's just kind of goes, it just goes. Briefly, I'll just talk a little bit about Fallujah. Maybe you guys saw some of this stuff. This is public domain stuff. Like I say, Fallujah was really a spike, I think, in insurgent activity, because it was, it really, the enemy chose to go head-to-head with U.S. forces. When I say head-to-head, infantry on infantry down city streets. And there's the picture of the mosque. Remember the big deal the first week that they were supposed to hit the mosque? That's the part they took out there. They said they had about 40 insurgents congregating right there, so they dropped a precision-guided JDAM right there. There's another, weapons. I throw this up. There's nothing new. I mean, this is not, there's weapons everywhere in Iraq. RPG tubes. The rocket goes in the front of the tube. You can fire it like that. Various Kalashnikov models, an old like 1950s era or 40s era Soviet machine gun, 220 or 200 round drum barrel. So you pull up to an SUV and you have 3 guys with these, and they put 600 rounds in your vehicle in like a minute and a half. So these are the kind of things they make improvised explosive devices, IEDs, with. A lot of just old leftover artillery shells. You've got artillery shells here. You've got mortar rounds here. Lots of stuff. Anybody ingenious enough to sort of think it through can come up with all kinds of ways to sort of booby-trap the weapon and make it work. I mean, one of the things they tried to do on the Striker, they realized they couldn't. They hadn't been able to inflict a casualty on the Striker. So what they did was they were starting to plant bombs on the overpasses. And so whenever Strikers go under an overpass, they always start in one lane and go out the other lane, because people were actually dropping bombs off the bridge, off the top. But also they were trying to detonate them so that the blast would go down, and maybe the only way they felt they could inflict a casualty is to maybe kill the guys that were going. The blast would go down inside the air hatch. One Striker was hit that way. It knocked both guys completely down inside the air hatch, and they had some lacerations from their helmet and their body armor, but again, they weren't hurt, and the vehicle kept rolling. So this is one of the Marine checkpoints in Fallujah. I read an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal the other day about these ambulance drivers. They're getting, they're trying to go in, and they're getting shot at by the insurgent forces or commandeered, and then the Marines, they've also caught insurgents using ambulance to funnel weapons, and so the Marines are then rousting them, and so they feel like all bent out of shape about it. But again, just going into Fallujah, I don't have many images there, but that's kind of all I had for the PowerPoint, except for my 3-minute video, which I can't show you because it won't work. But there's so many things we could talk about, when it comes to the war in Iraq. And so I think I'd rather just open it up to some questions and see where it goes from there. I'd try to give you a good tactical picture of what's going on in Mosul, because I think it is indicative of what's going on elsewhere in the greater Iraqi theater, excluding, like I say, the spike in Fallujah and Najaf and Sadr City. But we need to wait and see if that's going to happen, if that's going to become a common occurrence. Because still head-to-head, insurgents will pay a heavy price. And so I don't know if they'd be that willing to do it. One thing that has been interesting is you see a lot less suicide bombs, that I think there was kind of seemed like they were on the rise 6 months ago, and now you don't see any suicide bombs. And what I've been trying to figure out, does that give an implication of the type of people we're fighting? Because there's only a certain type of Islamic militant that will usually employ the suicide bomb. Or is it a situational effect where only when you're desperate enough do you put together the suicide bomb? Because in Chechnya, there were no suicide attacks until like a year and a half ago. None. I think there was 1 or 2 suspected in '98. They didn't need that strategy because they could dish it out to the Russians. They didn't need it. What I can't figure out is if the insurgents feel like they can live to fight another day and they don't need to employ that tactic. When the 101st arrived in Mosul, there were a number of suicide attacks against armored vehicles, and I've seen the pictures. These guys just run up against the vehicle and throw themselves, blow themselves up. The vehicle's just sitting there. It's just red now because the entire front, the pictures of these Bradleys just completely speckled with brains and skin and flesh, and no one in the vehicle's hurt. It's an armored vehicle. So maybe they just determined that that strategy or that tactic is not going to work anymore. Better to get a taxi and 3 or 4 machine guns and just go for every soft-skinned vehicle you can, which you've also read about the, it's been a big deal now, they're trying to get more armored Humvees to Iraq. What's really, really fascinating, if you go to the combat on the base, just past the Stryker base, there's a supply group and an artillery base, artillery position, and they all have Humvees. And they have gone to welding any sheet metal they can find onto the sides. Some of them actually take the time to cut it out and make it look like a door, and the others just slap a big sheet of steel on it and go out through the roof. These guys are taking so many hits in the soft-skinned vehicles they just don't want to do. They can't deal with it. So they're just armoring their Humvees however they can. So, hey, Paul.
Could you squeeze a comment in about your old neighborhood in Afghanistan?
My what?
Your old neighborhood in Afghanistan. What's happening?
You up in Mazar-i-Sharif?
Or Kabul and
Oh, Kabul.
Karzai?
I don't know what's happening in Afghanistan. I honestly would really like to go back to Afghanistan. I'd prefer to go there rather than Iraq. I don't know. I don't know if I can add any light that you couldn't have read out of the paper because it's been a while since I've been there. I do know that I've been looking at the troop numbers and contemplating, the whole shift to Iraq and listening to members of the administrations and then members of Kerry's camp talk about misuse of troops and how we're bantering back and forth about how well they're fighting or how bad they're fighting the war. And the one thing I would say is what really caught my eye while I was there was the use of how important special forces are in Iraq. And one thing we're kind of not getting is that they are really important in Iraq because they're conducting the bulk of offensive operations. We have 9,000 troops in Afghanistan, 120 to 130 in Iraq. And there is a bit, I think they diverted resources, and should they have diverted them? I don't know. But I think one reason we still are plugging away there as much as we are, and there's a lot of reasons, is that we did have to send a lot of people to Iraq that probably could still be in Afghanistan. Frontline infantry troops, there's always that argument that Afghanistan was a special forces type war, but that Iraq was not. But see, Iraq, it really is. I mean, yes, you need 100,000 troops there because you have long supply lines from Kuwait, really long supply lines from Kuwait. And they're getting hit all the time, but to do the real dirty work and search out these guerrillas, you need Task Force 121 and Navy SEAL team and everybody else.
What's going to happen after the turnout?
Well, nothing. I think I don't know, maybe I think there's a misconception. I mean, the turnover is just a government turnover backed by U.S. power. I always hear people say when the troops pull out in June. There's never been a discussion of the troops pulling out in June, so I hope people understand that it's Coalition Provisional Authority is supposed to turn over the government to an appointed Iraqi government that's supposed to be, ideally democratic, represent all the ethnic groups, the 3 big ethnic groups, and somehow function and be supported by the muscle of the U.S. military or coalition military. I don't know if anything drastically different will happen. I don't even know if they'll make their deadline, but certainly as far as military operations, nothing different is going to happen, I don't think.
Okay, you were on the ground, and you say that most of the Iraqis seem to be positive, but with some of the new things that are coming out, like this alleged abuse and whatever, can you see that tide turning? And as you say, the guy who gives you the food at lunch is out trying to take you out at night?
I knew someone was going to bring that up. I am so, I don't want to make too much of it. I don't know if it's like the tip of an iceberg what happened at that prison or if that's all that happened. But the sad part is, and I've been thinking this through since 9/11, is that there has to be a new model developed to fight and win war if you have to go to war. It's not about just winning the battles militarily. It's just not. I listen to the liberal press, and I'm always fascinated because they make so much out of the breakdown of the rule of law and people aren't secure. But you know what? I can think of 6 examples right now worldwide where that's the case. In war, in the wake of war, the rule of law always breaks down. I can't think of any other example where it hasn't. At the end of World War II, Europe was devastated. U.S. came in and bailed it out. It was a Marshall Plan. It was a different culture of time, and people, that worked. We have to think of a new model for the types of places we're playing war, or we're fighting, because the rule of law, we destroyed the government and societal institutions that keep that country that country existed under. They're not going to be resurrected in a day or a year, maybe even a decade. So then what is the end game when you're going to go in and eliminate all those those pillars that that society is resting on? And again, in Chechnya, Abkhazia, Nagorno-Karabakh, Bosnia, all these places, it's the same. So that shouldn't be taken out of context in the sense that you shouldn't be so traumatized that there's no rule of law. That's just like, hey, when you go to war, face it, war's messy, and you destroy things, and things take time to be rebuilt. That, I think, in the context of that, the prisoner abuse scandal is really too bad, because I think that anybody who was on the fence in the Arab world has one more reason to hate us. Whether it was 6 guys that just were stupid, where the 129,999, we're all good. That really, it speaks unfortunately, it kills the Hearts and Minds campaign. I think it's way more, its ripple effect will be way more dramatic than I think it should be, but it will. And I think, I think that's really sad and really unfortunate. But again, war is messy. Most troops don't want to do police action. I had a Marine tell me last year, I just want to kill an Iraqi. I don't even care if I have to shoot him in the back. I just want to kill one. And I don't think he really wanted to, but I think he was frustrated that he had fought all the way to Baghdad, never even saw one, and could put one in his sights. And he says, geez, you trained for 4 years to do this. You might as well see if you can do it. And I don't know if I think I don't think that's necessarily a bad feeling. I mean, you're cooped up in a track. You train to fight. I don't know, I've kind of strayed off the topic and gotten some others, but I think that's too bad about the prison thing, and I think especially in the wake of trying to rebuild Iraq to whatever it's supposed to look like and actually win the war. If you want to say the war was won when President Bush got on the aircraft carrier and said mission accomplished, then yes, we won the major battles, but we're a long way. We have 800 dead now, and we're going to have 1,000 in a matter of months. And what's really interesting about that is if you think about prior to the war, January 2003, most people were ready to take 10,000 casualties, assuming they'd get hit with a chemical or weapon, and you accepted it because that was a rational justification of the war, and it was unfortunate, but you could lose that many to rid the sky of his chemical weapons. But now, in light that they've never been able to get them or find them, 800 seems like too many. But we were ready to take 10,000 or more, tens of thousands. It's just that the war has changed. The one thing I think, and I'm rambling on, so you guys can stop me anytime, but I really do feel like I hate to use large historical or these grand historical comparisons, but I think we're looking at the ghost of Vietnam in the sense of the media coverage of this. And 800 troops is a drop in the bucket compared to how many troops have been over there. I'm not minimizing the impact of their deaths on their families and their loved ones, but it's nothing. When you think about it, what we did to lose 800 is nothing. It's just the context of how we're losing 800. But the really interesting point is, I think it was at Nightline that wanted to read all the names and show a picture, and some of the stations refused to show it, or they were instructed by the owner, I don't know, something, the media conglomerate that owns some of these stations, is that 800 is a drop in the bucket. Yet if you read 800 names and show 800 faces, it's pretty emotional. And it's going to go on for 2 hours. I don't know how long it went on for, but it goes on for a while, and that's sad. But what's the larger picture? And so there's always this fear, because I know a lot of the military commanders I spoke to really feel like they lost the war in Vietnam, at least partially attribute it to images of dead Americans on TV, that the U.S. lost the stomach for war, without thinking, was it rational, was it just, was it a just war? And again, everybody's going to have their own opinion whether it was just or not, but the fact that emotion got involved and policy was subject to emotion. And that's what that's what some people are saying, that the 800 showing them on TV, we're letting emotion get involved. I don't know. It's just something to throw out there, yeah.
You mentioned we're looking.
Hold on a second, please.
Oh.
Just remember to wait for the microphone. Help me out a lot.
You mentioned that we're looking at the ghost of Vietnam, but also if we look at the abuses that happened or were shown a few days ago, you also can't help but think of special forces and CIA operatives running around in Vietnam, cutting off heads and ears, and so do you think that if this gets messier, we're going to get more abuses due to frustrated troops or of that sort?
That's a good question. I don't know. And I'm not just pandering to the military on this, but I mean, I've been with so many units that I would say, gosh, most of the guys are pretty stable and rational. They're not, what does it take for someone to go off the deep end? I don't know, or to feel like they can do this. I do think, obviously, and I'm not, it's not my field, but I think that you can certainly become desensitized in an awful place. Because again, we can see plenty of models of that. I keep looking to Chechnya, which is the worst place I've ever been. And the violence is so just unparalleled that, people just do unimaginable things to each other. And then just talk about it, I mean, like, on both sides. And I don't know if they would have done it in '94, but by now they do it to each other. So I don't know. I don't think the U.S. is going to, I don't think it'll be degenerate into anything like that at all. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, there was the Marine who bragged about shooting a guy in the back of the head. Remember this last year to some local reporters down in Vietnam, and then he's going under military charges, for maybe executing this guy. And he was, the backstory was they had just been rocketed, and he chased these guys around the corner of the building, but instead of taking them prisoner, as I understand it, I obviously wasn't there. He made him kneel and shot one of them in the head and killed him, and then or something, and then he went home and said, "Yeah, this is what I did." That guy had it coming to him. So, again, war is messy. When you unleash it, isolated instances can be emotional, but the overall picture, that sounds really bad, huh? I mean, let's look at World War II. British and Allied bombing campaigns killed 40,000 to 50,000 French civilians on their bombing runs into Germany because of creepback. You know what that is? Basically, the first bomb is over target. The second bomber wants to get his bombs out, so he pulls the door a little earlier. By the time you're at the last plane, you're 50 miles off your target, and you're just doing it's a wake of bombing, and anybody in that path is dead. And they estimate 40,000 to 50,000 French civilians killed by Allied bombing. But the war was won. How do you account for those lives, or that tactic, or that strategy, or it's just it's tricky. Just go here first, then.
Based on your experiences in Mosul and Fallujah, do you think that the coalition has in place the necessary resources to extinguish this fire of insurgents, or do we need more troops, more artillery, more armor?
Well, I don't think more troops is necessarily the answer. More artillery. Here's another interesting. I'll tell you, we don't even use the counter battery radar in Mosul. Why? Because we don't want to wipe out a block of civilians, which that is fantastic. We shouldn't do that. But if you're not going to use it, if you bring it in, it doesn't do any good. So artillery is useless now, because all insurgent activities are going to happen in the city in ones and twos, and you don't need artillery. You just don't need it. More troops. I think you need more special forces, trained troops that can go in and do this kind of nasty business of rooting out these cells. But I think that incidents like the prison abuse probably gained them 10,000 more recruits. And if they can find their way across the borders, they'll probably get there. And so that's part of the larger, the larger trouble. Extinguish it. I don't know. Let's look, how long have we been in Bosnia? Western forces in Bosnia. Now it's been 10 years, right? Or more. And the feeling is if you pull everybody out of Bosnia, it'll just go right back to what it was. So it's a tricky situation. I don't know. I wish I had it. I wish I knew the model, because if I could, I'd go and share it with the administration or Kerry's. Whoever's going to win. Why would anybody want it? I think Kerry's very funny because, there's no magic bullet for this. Whoever's president in the next term is really going to live, or inherit the legacy of this conflict. So whoever it is, there's no magic bullet to get out of it. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican or the Green Party.
You're neither media nor military, but I get the impression the media are really gutter inspectors. They play up some of these things that are way out of focus, way out of kilter.
Well, I think they provide snapshots. They don't provide every snapshot, but they provide snapshots. You always hear a joke, if it bleeds, it leads, and that's maybe a little unfair because I don't think it's that dramatic, but it's not a story if the convoy goes through. Whoa, the convoy went through and made it 12 miles, and they arrived at their destination. But it is a story of two vehicles that get blown up, and I don't know why that is, but that's just what stories are made out of. There's drama. And so unfortunately in the media you sometimes hear that, or you'll get that. I think there's a lot of, we've had this discussion a lot here about the media, and I think there's a number of issues. Everybody comes to war with their own bias, whether you're a soldier or a journalist. Some are to the left, some are to the right. Some have no military or war experience, and they don't even know how to really look at conflict. And I saw that a lot after 9/11 in Afghanistan. It was very, very funny to travel with some of the news crew, to watch them operate. But I think since we've been at war since 9/11, there's been a lot more return trips to these conflict zones, and the media's gotten a little more savvy. At least individuals have been to war now, and they're going back and they do a little more accurate, But it's a trick because media, they have a 5 o'clock deadline, a 10 o'clock deadline. You have to have a story. I did a little reporting, for CBS out of Afghanistan, and they were like, okay, what's your story for today? I said, I don't know. It's going to take 2 or 3 more days to unfold. Well, you only have an hour. So find your story, and you just stick with it. I go, what if I'm wrong? Well, you fix it tomorrow. And it's a kind of the economics of the business. It's the pressure that it didn't mean to get that way, and it's not inherently evil or trying to be misleading, but this is the interesting thing about war. I mean, seriously, you can be fighting somebody here, and 20 meters down the road, it's not quiet because they can hear, but there's nothing going on. You're at a post, and you're like, you want to turn and fight, but you're not allowed to because you got to guard that perimeter. If you're a journalist here, you see that battle completely different than you saw it here. So it really depends on where you're placed. And then, the Mazar-i-Sharif, I got really lucky. Just happened upon that fortress, saw it all unfold. But even within the fortress, it's like there was a special forces team right around the corner in 50 meters. I didn't see what they did. I don't see hear the radio traffic. I had no idea what. I just derived it from being at a different place. And so it's hard, to talk about fog of war they're going to show. I think that show's a little mistitled, but I think it's a good thing to remember that wars are very complicated. The easiest things are difficult.
I wanted to go back.
Oh yeah, your question about Iraqi, why they're killing their own?
I'm not a political scientist, and I don't study military. I actually am a social scientist, and I'm more interested in your commentary, along with my question about why the Iraqis have leashed out against the Red Cross and their own forces, and why they don't take their own government seriously, even if it is to some extent democratic. What has been your experience with the Iraqi people? How are they reacting? What does this say about their culture?
One, I haven't had near enough experience with the Iraqi people to give a consensus for them. And two, remember they're a very splintered group into 3 major ethnic groups that really don't like each other at all. So they have different pictures of that and each other and their relationship, which makes the government difficult. I think it's problematic. The U.S. invaded, which is we set a sort of a precedent by being proactive, invading a country upon the threat rather than having it being struck like Pearl Harbor, then they go in and do it, whether we did things that led to Pearl Harbor or not. But here we went ahead and we did it. It sent a message. Those who didn't like us had just more, another reason to believe that we were very aggressive and we were going to take all the oil for ourselves, or whatever they wanted to believe. The government, whenever I hear Paul Bremer say we're going to have democracy by June, I just think that guy's, I don't know. I mean, that guy's on drugs or something. There's no way, Then my next question to myself is, do we need to have democracy in Iraq? I don't think we need it. Democracy works for us. It doesn't have to work for them. And are there any democratic Arab governments anywhere? I mean, Turkey, again, that's not an Arab government, but okay, look at Turkey. They're democratic, kind of, but they're like one revolution away from it all going down. And so to insist on Western-style democracy in a country that has like no democratic tradition, it's a lot. It's a lot to ask for. I think it's maybe stretching it a little bit. I think there needs to be transition periods. And I go back to some of my experience in the former Soviet Union when I talked to these people in the early and mid-'90s in Georgia and Chechnya and Dagestan and places like that, and they said, I can understand democracy, I can read it, but I don't know how to really live it. I don't know how to practice it. I leave that to my kids and my kids' generation to adapt these models and to make it work. It's not easy. I mean, look at the history of the U.S. Democracy is really tough. America is an ideal more than anything, but you constantly have to fight to keep the ideal alive. And so it's a lot to ask for a country like Iraq who had no political expression under the Saddam regime. So it's been a stunted growth pattern for the people too. I'm not saying not that they're stupid. They're they're intelligent. They're probably just like everybody else, but they haven't had the options and opportunities to experience or to do anything in the political arena that didn't have Saddam's stamp on it. You kind of had a multiple question. What was it? Oh, the police thing. Yeah. Well, all I can say about that is if you don't believe, if you feel like you've been occupied, and then part of your population sides with the occupiers, under that rationale, you have every right to wipe them out as fast as you possibly can. And in fact, you probably want to target softer targets. Why go up against a striker vehicle that hasn't suffered a single casualty when you can, what is that? A striker vehicle and you suffer a single casualty, when you can take out an Iraqi policeman every day. Because what you really do is you can splinter the coalition, because the coalition is bigger than just the U.S., it is the Iraqis. And if you can inflict enough casualties on the Iraqi side, you can drive the Iraqis who would have gone with the U.S., you can drive them away. So it's a great guerrilla strategy. It's a great tactic, a great insurgent tactic. Same thing in Chechnya, and I keep going back to Chechnya, but I think it's a great model that gets overlooked. The Chechen, pro-Russian Chechen forces, they get killed all the time by the Chechen rebels. But you never really hear about it. But they learn, why go up against a BTR when I can go up against the guy in a little Lada, And hey, he was a Chechen, but he sided with Russia, so he's off our list, or he's on our list, I guess. Yeah.
I was actually going to ask what you observed when you were in Chechnya, the differences in combat, like in the combat strategies between the two places.
Well, the first thing to say about that is the Russians are not afraid to level a block to kill one sniper. That's why you had such dramatic civilian death, KIA deaths in Chechnya. The U.S. has killed U.S. troops have killed numbers and numbers of civilians, but I would say that 99.9% of them are not on purpose, and it's not just to get the one bad guy. Things happen, and sometimes people get targeted, but in Russia, I think the biggest thing is there's a real effort to just, I'm not going to, just wipe out the Chechen resistance, which means, i.e., wipe out the Chechen people, because there's a real belief that the Chechen people, I think it was Tolstoy who said, way back, I think, when they were invading or fighting the Chechens a couple centuries ago, that, every Chechen will fight you from the infant to the grandma, so you can't let any, you can't leave any, you have to make sure, and Putin said, we will rub them out even in the toilet, quote. And it's really, it hasn't, the U.S. operation in Iraq hasn't gotten anywhere near what the Russian Chechen operation has gone.
Where do you think the outrage is from the media on the human rights abuses that are going on in Chechnya?
Well, one, again, and I've argued this point before, and I don't know if it's very popular, but I think when war starts, human rights goes out the window. If you think about the history of human rights organizations, didn't they start to do a lot they cared more about internal policing governments on their own internal policies, and now you have human rights people going out to interstate and external state conflicts, and it's a nice way to try to put a lid on it and keep redefining the rules of war, but human rights in war really get shoved out. Is that me? I think it's maybe it's the court. Stand over here. But am I still on? Okay. I don't know. The other thing is there's no access to Russia. The Russians aren't allowing people to go into Chechnya, so you're, to see and do a human rights assessment, you're going to have to go into the Chechen rebels. And I did that once over the mountains. I tried to do it once in 2001 through the Pankisi Valley, and I couldn't get through the mountains. And it's so high risk. It's just really, really difficult to get that story. And I don't know. Yeah.
I just have a question about the rules of engagement that these guys are having to follow, and I guess another one. But when can the troops fire? And also, are these insurgents still using civilians as shields and like the children to stop vehicles like they were a year ago?
I think there's been cases where they still use those tactics, but it's hard for me to get a clear picture of the insurgent because I think you're dealing with outside fundamentalists who think this is my chance to inflict pain and kill an American that are sneaking in across, because I have some friends that are now in units on the Syrian border, and they're nabbing guys all the time, which isn't making the news at all. But I just think it's because nobody wants to go to the Syrian border. But there are Marine Corps units out there protecting those borders, and they're nabbing guys a lot. And there's other units on the Iranian border nabbing people that are smuggling weapons and, fighters, mujahideen. So it seems like it's such a splintered group, and people are fighting for a variety of reasons, that I think it's hard to say if insurgents as a unified tactic will use that, children or, but I think some, they'll use whatever, history says that guerrilla conflicts will degenerate, if you want to use that word, into whatever it takes, whatever works, which means that the war gets messier. And what was the other part of your question? Rules of engagement. Well, now the rules of engagement are different because they used to have, in Block 1 operations, or is it Block 3? You go to Block 3, 2, 1, or is it 1, 2, 3? I can never remember. 2 is stability operations. And when you go to Block 2, your rules of engagement change. And I don't know if I can accurately portray them, but they can't. They can obviously fire if they're fired upon, but I know that there's issues about even firing in urban areas. Like even if they see guys with weapons, they can't fire on them, the guys told me.
I was there a year ago, and after we'd been in Baghdad for about a week or two, they took away our mortars, and we had to have division approval to use any indirect fire at all.
Right.
And I've talked to guys that have just got back. They can't fire unless they see a man with a weapon. They can't shoot a muzzle flash or anything along those lines. So are their hands still that tied?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Which, again, it's that really problematic urban. If we didn't care about the Iraqi civilians at all, and this is the thing that people forget, we do care. I mean, even though maybe, people can argue that it may be mismanaged or this or that, we don't want to destroy the country. We do care about the Iraqi civilians, or we take the Russian approach, and every muzzle flash, you just call in counter battery or something, and you just flatten the block and say, well, we got them. And that's, so it's really tricky. It's really interesting because, some people over in Mosul this last time, they referred to it the same way, their hands are tied. They're not even using counter battery radar at all. They get mortared every day, and they're not even turning it on because they know that they're going to inflict civilian casualties. So they're willing to take that punishment and not dish it back out. So it's tough. What unit were you in?
I was with 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines.
Oh, okay. Task Force Taro?
No, we were with RCT-1.
RCT-1.
So we went up through Nasiriyah, Al-Gharaaf, and then Baghdad.
Okay. You guys fought that big action in Nasiriyah, right?
We didn't we never dismounted. We just drove through the city. I mean, we took and returned fire, and then Al-Gharaaf, there was, I think, a guy from Alpha 111 got killed, and our company bailed him out, and then we didn't make any contact till Baghdad, and then we took the Ministry of Defense.
Ministry of Defense.
Yeah. Rick Leventhal was with us.
Oh,
if you remember that at all.
Yeah, I do remember him being there. It's really interesting now. I mean, it's just the unit I was with. I was a 3-7 India company, and like I said, now they're on the Syrian border. And I'm going to go back out sometime this summer to watch their, because I want to see the difference between the large maneuver warfare type setting we had last year and now this kind of new, the new mission, restricted rules of engagement. I mean, the rules of engagement were pretty easy in the beginning when we crossed the line of departure. You could fire at a guy running away as long as he didn't drop his weapon because, well, basically, he turns around and lives to fight another day. So you've got to take those guys out. But now you can't do anything like that. So it's tricky. Huh? Oh, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. But people on board, we can keep talking. Yeah.
Kind of by watching the media, you kind of get a sense that it's a little more unstable now in Iraq than when we first got there a year ago. And since you were there then, now you've been back, do you see, not just with the military, but do you see the lives of the people actually any different or getting better? Or is it just kind of the same as where it was a year ago under
Life
Saddam?
for the average Iraqi is it's 100 times better. This is a simple statistic of 150,000 new vehicles. People are enjoying this sort of capitalist freedom. I mean, they really are. And if you go to I went to the used car market. We patrolled it every day. It was part of our patrol route. And I wondered why we never changed our patrol route, because I thought, but again, they want to draw fire. I think they really wanted to try to engage, so the only way to do that is to kind of advertise you're going to go the same way every day and hope that your body armor and your helmet and your vehicle protects you, and it does. I mean, it really does. I mean, if you didn't have this stuff, you'd take more casualties. But you can see it's a thriving economy in Mosul. And again, it leads me back to I really do firmly believe that it's 90, 95, 98% are totally fine or indifferent. Because really, when you think about it, most people want to be able to protect their family, have a good living, have a nice place to live, and have basic security. And I don't think the Iraqis are any different than that. The trouble is extremists don't have to act in large numbers to get results. So that's the one thing I do think. And I've seen reports from Basra and other places in the south where the life is, I mean, it's a lot better for Iraq. It's a lot better. In fact, I talked to the sergeant for the Iraqi Civil Defense Corps, and he said that he showed me all the burns because he was electrocuted by Saddam's guys like 3 times. I said, what for? He goes, oh, they just did it periodically to make sure, you know. He had like these electro, you know, just all the way up both arms and stuff. And so it is better, you know. I mean, no, we didn't find weapons of mass destruction. Were they imminent threat? Probably not. But did you remove a really brutal dictator? Yes. So I mean, you have to sort of everybody figures out for themselves whether the cost is worth it, you know, or whether, you know. But again, removing him is step one. The war isn't won really until you're able to bring it back on its. And I think sometimes, and one of the Marine Corps commanders told me, he goes, I hope we build this country back more appropriate to. Build it back in the condition that's more appropriate to their history rather than our own. Because sometimes we look at our own and say, well, this model works for us, so we're going to throw it on them. And I think there's a danger there sometimes. Did I answer all your questions or even discuss them? Okay, sorry. I get off topic sometimes. But hold on, Paul, one behind you here.
I just had a question about the insurgents. Is there any of them that are still supporting the former regime, or are there most of them just extremist fundamentalists? And if there are none of them that are supporting the regime, where have they gone, or are they just kind of accustomed to the new style?
You know, that's a very good question. I think they have prisoners that probably, you know, would indicate that there's probably both. I've always believed you're facing at least 3 types of insurgent, and 1 is the fundamentalist, 2 is the regime loyalist, and 3, there's the simple person that wants revenge because someone in his family got killed. Because we see that is something that's also very prevalent over there. Especially, I think it's aggravated the situation in Fallujah, and I think the Marines are feeling the brunt of that. You know, it was 9 months ago there was that demonstration where soldiers felt like they swear they're fired at, but they returned fire into the crowd and killed 18 demonstrators. None of them those 18 turned out to be armed. And since then, Fallujah's been worse, and I think a lot of it is the simple revenge. So I think it's not easy to paint a single picture of the insurgent over there, which is why it's difficult to talk about tactics, insurgent tactics. It's hard to say exactly. I think certain people will go to different ends. I can't believe the loyalists will stick around too much longer, but you also got to remember that regime loyalist is based almost exclusively on the Sunni minority. So it's not only, you know, there's a way to look at that. So you're a regime loyalist, but you're also part of the Sunni minority who's now facing getting completely squeezed out, or at least not sharing or controlling the power like they did. They'll be a part of it, but they're not going to control Iraq. And so it's more than just being a regime loyalist. Your whole group, your ethnic group, is about to be disenfranchised to a point where you're going to be just nominal in the larger Iraqi government. So you have to think of it a little bit like that, which just makes that, you know, that whole Sunni triangle, which is a little portion of Iraq, but it's a very volatile region. Paul?
Are we getting our story through to them on television or radio in the country? Positive?
I don't know. You know, I don't know. I know that when we invaded last year and I went through we went through Al-Numani, and I left my unit for a little while, just went into the streets because I needed a kebab. I couldn't eat another MRE. And I just went on my own, went into this little place, and I sat down. Pretty soon I had like 50 Iraqi men talking to me. We were all talking. And they swore up and down. Well, Saddam's propaganda was making it, and ours wasn't. You know, I know we dropped a lot of flyers and things like this, and we were broadcasting messages, but they all believed, and they heard on Iraqi TV, that every soldier gets $100,000 to steal the oil for Bush. And they believed it. And I said, I wish we all got $100,000 to be here for this, you know, whatever it's going to be to do it. But I said, I can guarantee that's not the case. This is not the case. But that was the message they had heard. And their side was winning the propaganda war then. And I was actually surprised that they believed that. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say. I wish I knew. But again, the average person just really wants to have life go on. And, the guy who's buying new cars in Mosul or new used cars in Mosul, hey man, it's business. He just wants business and he wants his family, and that's kind of what the majority of people all over the world want. And it's just, it's going to be sort of a painful transition. These transitions are always painful. That's the thing I think we need. I think the one message, a message that needs to be remembered is that these transitions are always painful. When things go to the point of war and then they bounce back, it's not simple. It's not, innocent people get killed. And then it's a question of, do you let the emotion of small numbers of troops, these emotions get mixed up with larger policy issues. And that's hard to sort out in an age where you have 24-hour media blitz that can show you every dead body and everything, which does play to your emotion. It's hard to say, I don't know, which is right, but we're in it. So now we're going to have, we get to live with it and we have to do it. But I really do believe we have to come up with a new model. I really believe that thinks of war being won when, what's the end result? Why do you want to attack Iraq? To remove Saddam. If that's the only reason, okay, but why do you really want to attack? What's the purpose of it? If that end game purpose can't be met with your strategy and your tactics, your grand strategy, then you need to come up with another strategy line that can get you to your end result. If you want a stable democratic country in Iraq, which again I think we're projecting our values on them to insist on a democracy in Iraq. But if you're, whatever that government is, you want a stable, play by the rules government in Iraq, what does it take to get there? Just removing Saddam is one step, but it's not going to get you through the other all the way through. And I wish I knew the answer, because I'm really not, providing any new insight to that. Yeah. Okay. There's just two questions there. I'll just do them.
How much longer do you think we'll have to maintain a military presence in Iraq?
Oh, a long time.
10, 30 years?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe we'll lose interest someday and just, move out like we did in Vietnam or something. I don't know. It's hard to say, and again, I'm not trying to make a comparison between Vietnam. I think there's way too many differences to do that. But what I always notice when we go to into these conflicts, you have an idea of what winning is, and it's maybe here. And by the time you actually pull out, you still say you won, but you're down here. In other words, you had 20 objectives. If we get these 20 objectives, we win. 10 years later, wow, we met these 3 objectives, we won. And it's just kind of the way things evolve. I don't know how long we'll be there, but I do think you should look at the other models. Look at Bosnia. And there has to be a massive, if we really do want to sort of turn and have a much more hearts and minds centered campaign, especially in the Arab or the Muslim world, we really have to start thinking on larger terms like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Because Osama didn't happen overnight. Whether it was his fault or our fault, there's contention between us and him and people like him for 20, 30 years. So these things take time to evolve into open struggle, and they'll take time to probably go down. That's my opinion.
Given that, information and propaganda and who's accepting what or which Iraqis are accepting what information from what source, what do you think, or what kind of efforts do you see the Arab Islamic world making towards kind of banding together and creating information that that would tend to lead like you said, the fence sitters away from the fundamentalists' camps versus, is there a real strong effort, and is it more a collaborative effort, or how is that? What would your assessment of that be?
I don't know if that's a difficult question. I don't know. I do know that. No, I have a thought. I can't think of how to express this, but I think about the Arab media and the Arab world, and it's troubling because I do think that the Arab communities need to become more proactive and support. If they like what the U.S. is doing there, they need to get up and support it. They need to turn these guys in. If there's 2 cells operating on their block, I believe they need to turn these guys in. And they have done that from what I hear, but it's really, that's an intelligence issue, and they're not going to ever give away their sources and stuff like that. But I have heard from the S2 in certain, different units that they are starting to get more help from local people. there needs to be a little bit more proactive approach, I think. But I think what you're going to see is, oh my goodness, I mean, you're talking about decades of stuff that's going to unravel. I mean, what's going to happen when Saudi Arabia unravels? The House of Saud is weak. I mean, that's going to be, what's going to happen there? We're going to go in there to pull that place together. If that thing fails, probably, since so much oil reserves there, and we get most of ours from Saudi. We don't get any oil from Iraq, or we didn't, but our allies did. But what about Saudi Arabia? What about all these places? I mean, Saudi Arabia is very difficult. That if they take a proactive approach with us, then they deal with their own segment of society or their own population who will just destroy that country, unless they get support from us, which will then in turn destroy the country. There's no real easy answer to this, On the other side of that, and you can't ignore this question, the Israeli-Palestinian question. You can't ignore it. There's not an Arab in the world that I know of who says that our policy is pro-Palestinian. That it's not that it's even neutral. Every Muslim I've met around the world believes that we have a real pro-Israel policy. And so whether they actually like the fact that we got rid of Saddam, there's always this little thing in the back of their head saying, that their Arab brothers are being messed with over in Israel on their sacred land, and that is always going to be problematic. So people who would maybe run over and join to the side are still, I think, going to have that question, like, how do I deal with that in my conscience as an Arab or as a Muslim? Because it's really tricky. And then, like, again, if you want to use the domino effect, use an old Cold War, let's think of what's going to happen in the Middle East and those places if we really, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, those are fairly pro-Western type Middle Eastern governments, but, to assume that everybody in the Saudi Empire, everybody in the United Arab Emirates is pro, U.S. is just, or pro, let's warm up to them, it's just not realistic at all.